My name is Eliza Monroe, and until 3 months ago, I believed my life was a carefully constructed testament to the idea that you can build a future far stronger than your past. My own past was a patchwork of temporary homes and fractured beginnings. Orphaned young, I spent my childhood learning to pack light, both my belongings and my attachments. It wasn't until I was 13 that I landed in the warm, book-filled home of Beatrice Mayhew, a retired librarian who wasn't a foster mother in the official sense, but a distant relative who stepped in when the system had run out of places for me. Beatrice didn't just give me a room, she gave me roots, teaching me that stability wasn't a place, but a feeling you cultivate within yourself. She was the one who encouraged my fascination with medicine, who saw my quiet, observant nature not as a flaw, but as a strength. And so I built a stellar academic record, which led to medical school, which led to a coveted pediatric residency at Boston General Hospital. I built a life of purpose, surrounded by the resilient, unfiltered honesty of children. And I thought I had built a future with Daniel. Daniel, with his kind eyes and architectural blueprints spread across our sun-drenched apartment, was the final, beautiful piece of my construction. We were 16 days away from our wedding when the entire structure came crashing down. I didn't even get to sit down before he broke it off. The cafe, the Gilded Bean, was a place we both loved, a haven of rich mahogany, the scent of dark roast, and the quiet hum of intelligent conversation. It was our place. That day, however, it felt alien. The soft classical music drifting from hidden speakers sounded like a dirge. I had barely taken 2 steps toward our usual corner table when Daniel looked up from his untouched macchiato, his face a pale, strained mask. "Eliza," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "We need to talk." My stomach, which had been fluttering with pre-wedding jitters and excitement, plummeted into a cold, hard knot. I remember thinking how rehearsed he sounded, like an actor delivering a line he'd practiced in the mirror 100 times. I sat anyway, my hands suddenly clammy as I smoothed the fabric of my dress over my knees. "What's going on?" I asked, a fragile smile stretching my lips. My mind raced through a list of manageable disasters. Is this about the string quartet for the ceremony? Did they cancel? He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, his gaze fixed on the table as he reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. He placed a small, navy blue velvet box between us. For a dizzying second, I thought it was another gift, a pre-wedding surprise. But he didn't push it toward me. He just left it there, a tiny, silent bomb. "I can't marry you, Eliza," he said. The words didn't explode. They seeped into the air, quiet and lethal, carving through the carefully built walls of my life with the precision of a surgeon's blade. The sounds of the cafe, the clink of porcelain, the murmur of a nearby couple, faded into a distant roar. "What?" The word was a whisper, a ghost of a sound. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not sorrow, but a chilling relief, as if shedding me was the final step toward his own liberation. "It isn't you," he began, the oldest, cruelest cliché. "It's just, our paths are diverging. I've been presented with opportunities, Eliza. Life-changing ones. Victoria Sinclair and we have an alignment in our ambitions, a synergy I didn't understand was possible before." Victoria Sinclair. The name hung in the air, dripping with significance. Daughter of the formidable titan, Gregory Sinclair, whose Sinclair Development Group had reshaped Boston's skyline. I'd met her once at a gallery opening, a woman who moved through the world with an effortless, inherited confidence I had spent my life trying to build from scratch. My heart began a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. "You're leaving me for her?" "It's not so simple," he said, though his inability to deny it was the clearest answer of all. "This is for the best, for both of us. You deserve a simpler life, a quieter path. You've always been about healing others, not building empires." He delivered the line as if it were a compliment, but it felt like a dismissal, a neat categorization of my entire being into a box he no longer found useful. I stared at him, my mind unable to reconcile this cold stranger with the man who had held me just last night, whispering about the home we would build together. 16 days. In 16 days, I was supposed to become his wife. Now, I was just an obstacle he had finally neatly removed. As if sensing my stunned silence was an opening, he gestured toward the velvet box. And the ring, he added, his voice regaining some of its businesslike efficiency. It's a family heirloom. My mother would be heartbroken if it were to leave the family. That was the final cut, the one that severed the last thread of hope. My hands were shaking, but a strange, cold calm washed over me. I slipped the diamond ring from my finger. It felt foreign now, a beautiful, glittering lie. I placed it gently on the lid of the box, the small click echoing in the sudden silence between us. "Thank you for your honesty, Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than I thought possible. Then I stood up. I walked away without looking back, my spine straight, my head held high. I moved past the glossy pastry case, past the laughing couple, past the curious glances of strangers who were witnessing the quiet demolition of a life. It was only when I turned the corner onto the wind-whipped street, the gray Boston sky pressing down on me, that the first tear finally escaped, tracing a cold path down my cheek. I took a cab back to the apartment we shared, the one filled with half-packed boxes and wedding gifts. I knew I couldn't stay, couldn't face the ghost of our shared future hanging in every room. When I arrived, I found I didn't have to. By the door, stacked in neat, impersonal piles, were my things. Not just the boxes I had packed, but everything that was mine, my clothes, my books, my medical texts, all sorted into suitcases and labeled in a crisp, unfamiliar handwriting. It was an act of such cold, calculated efficiency that it took my breath away. This wasn't Daniel's work. He was never this organized. It had the meticulous touch of his mother. I was not just being left, I was being returned to sender. I sank to the floor beside those bags, the weight of it all finally crushing me. My lease on my old apartment had ended last month, the keys handed over to a young art student. Every penny of my savings, every spare dollar from my resident's meager salary, had been funneled into the deposits for the wedding, the venue, the caterer, the flowers. I checked my bank account on my phone. I had less than $200 and a week until my next paycheck. At 29 years old, I was heartbroken, homeless, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. That's when I did the one thing I hadn't done in years, the thing I always reserved for when the foundations truly crumbled. I called Beatrice. She answered on the second ring, her voice as warm and steady as the worn pages of her favorite books. "Eliza, my dear. I was just thinking of you. That little bookshop in the North End got a first edition of The Little Prince, and I was going to call you about it." I tried to form words, to explain the wreckage of my life, but all that came out was a choked, guttural sob. That was all it took for Beatrice. She didn't need the details. An hour later, after a quiet, tear-filled train ride out of the city, I was curled on her faded floral couch, the one that smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. She cradled a mug of chamomile tea in my trembling hands and smoothed my hair back from my forehead, just as she had when I was a broken-hearted teenager, reeling from another disappointment. Beatrice never pressed for the story. She simply placed a thick, hand-knitted afghan over my legs and said, "Stay as long as you need to, my love. You hear me? This house has space, and your heart has nothing to prove here." That night, I lay awake in the small guest room, staring at the familiar shadows the moonlight cast through the branches of the old oak tree outside. I replayed Daniel's words, his chilling calmness, the way he had already moved on while I was still standing at the starting line of our supposed future. Had any of it been real? Or was I just a placeholder, a comfortable, respectable partner, until someone with a name like Sinclair appeared on the horizon? By the time the sun rose, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gray, the sharp ache in my chest had settled into something heavier, a profound sense of shame. I was supposed to be starting a family, building a home. Instead, I was back where I had started so many years ago, a guest in someone else's house, with everything I owned in a few bags by the door. For 3 weeks, I existed in the quiet rhythm of Beatrice's life. I went through the motions at the hospital, forcing smiles and offering vague excuses about the wedding being postponed due to a family matter. The lies felt like swallowing shards of glass, but the truth felt like it would tear me apart completely. At night, I would return to Beatrice's embrace, her gentle wisdom a balm on my fractured soul. We'd sit by the fire, and she would read poetry aloud, her voice weaving a net of solace around me. A heartbreak is not just a loss of love, Eliza, she told me one evening, closing a book of Mary Oliver's poems. It's a loss of the story you told yourself about the future. The trick is not to try and mend the old story, but to find the courage to start a new one, even if you don't know the first word. My new story began, as they so often do, with a quiet conversation in a hospital corridor. My friend Lena, a fellow resident with a refreshingly blunt demeanor and an uncanny ability to see through my carefully constructed facade, cornered me by the nurse's station. "Monroe," she said, her arms crossed. "You look like a ghost. This postponement story isn't flying. Talk to me." And so I did. I told her everything, the words spilling out in a hushed, pained rush. She listened without interruption, her expression softening from impatience to a deep, fierce empathy. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Good. He was a spineless wonder, and you're better off. But you need to get out of Boston for a while. You need a change of scenery so vast it forces you to breathe differently." She paused, a thoughtful glint in her eye. "You know my cousin, the one who does private nursing? She told me about a job. It's a long shot, but it's different." "Different how?" I asked, my voice weary. "It's on the coast of Maine. A live-in companion and medical aid for a reclusive author. Apparently, he had some kind of accident a couple of years ago, and he's a notorious grump. Chews through caregivers like they're stale bread. But the pay is astronomical, and you'd be living in this incredible old house right on the ocean. Total isolation. A perfect place to hide and heal." I hesitated. "Lena, I'm a pediatric resident, not a private caregiver. You're a doctor, Eliza. You have more medical knowledge in your little finger than most of the people they've probably hired. And honestly, your quiet, unshakable calm might be exactly what this guy needs. Or it might drive him crazy. Either way, it's a new chapter." She scribbled a name and number on a prescription pad. "Just call. What's the worst that can happen?" The name on the paper was Mrs. Sterling, estate manager for a Mr. Alastair Finch. I held onto that slip of paper for 2 days, the idea of it a tiny, flickering candle in the darkness of my mind. An escape. A place where no one knew my name, or the name of the man who broke my heart. A place where the story of my future hadn't been written yet. Finally, late one night, sitting on the porch swing at Beatrice's, with the scent of night-blooming jasmine in the air, I made the call. A crisp, formal voice answered on the first ring. "Sterling." "Hello," I stammered. "My name is Eliza Monroe. I was given your number regarding a position for a medical companion for Mr. Finch." There was a pause, filled with the faint crackle of the line. "Your credentials?" I listed my qualifications, my residency, my degree. "The position requires round-the-clock availability and absolute discretion. The location is isolated. The patient is challenging. Are you available for an interview tomorrow via video call at 10 a.m. sharp?" "Yes," I said, surprised by my own decisiveness. "Yes, I am. An email with the link will be sent to you. Do not be late." The line went dead. The interview was just as brief and efficient as the phone call. Mrs. Sterling, a woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing, asked me a series of pointed questions about my experience with chronic pain management and my ability to work independently. She didn't smile once. At the end of the 15-minute call, she stared at me through the screen and said, "The position is yours if you want it, Dr. Monroe. The salary is $20,000 a month, with room and board included. You would have a private suite of rooms. Your primary duties are medical oversight, medication management, and providing companionship as tolerated by Mr. Finch. The contract is for a minimum of 6 months. We will handle your travel arrangements. Can you be ready to leave in 3 days?" The number stunned me into silence. It was more money than I could fathom, a sum that would not only solve my immediate financial crisis, but give me a foundation to truly start over. A foundation built by me for me. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and firm. "I can." 3 days later, After a tearful goodbye with Beatrice, who packed me a bag of her famous lavender shortbread and a well-loved copy of Persuasion, I was in a private car, heading north out of Boston. The familiar city skyline gave way to the dense green forests of New Hampshire, and then, finally, to the rugged, breathtaking coastline of Maine. We drove for what felt like hours, turning onto smaller and smaller roads until the world was nothing but towering pine trees, the salty tang of the ocean, and the occasional glimpse of a gray, churning sea. The town was called Cresthaven, a tiny fishing village nestled in a rocky cove. But we drove past it, climbing a steep, winding road that hugged the cliffs. And then I saw the house. It wasn't a modern fortress of glass and steel. It was something out of a Bronte novel. Greywater House, as I would come to know it, was an old stone manor, built of dark, sea-stained granite, with ivy climbing its walls and tall, mullioned windows that looked like watchful eyes. It stood alone on a promontory, a solitary, magnificent sentinel against the vast, endless ocean. For a moment, a wave of intimidation washed over me, and I wanted to tell the driver to turn back. But it was too late. The heavy iron gates swung open, and we crunched up a long, gravel driveway. I had arrived at my new story. Mrs. Sterling met me at the heavy oak door. In person, she was even more formidable, her posture ramrod straight in a simple but immaculately pressed navy dress. She led me through the house with minimal commentary. The inside was as imposing as the exterior, with dark wood paneling, vaulted ceilings, and stone fireplaces large enough to stand in. It was filled with beautiful, antique furniture, but it felt less like a home and more like a museum, hushed and still, the air thick with the scent of old books and beeswax. Everything was polished to a high sheen, yet a profound melancholy clung to the shadows. "Your suite is in the east wing," she said, leading me up a grand, sweeping staircase. "Mr. Finch's is in the west wing. You are not to enter his wing unless medically necessary or expressly invited. He values his privacy above all else. Your meals will be prepared by our cook, Mrs. Potts. Your primary responsibility is his well-being. Discretion, as I mentioned, is paramount." She left me in my rooms, a beautiful, airy sitting room, a bedroom with a four-poster bed, and a modern bathroom, all with stunning views of the ocean. It was more luxury than I had ever known, yet it felt like a gilded cage. After unpacking my few belongings, which looked meager and out of place in the grand armoire, I stood at the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. I felt 1,000 miles and a lifetime away from Boston, from Daniel, from the woman I used to be. I didn't meet Alistair Finch until the next day. Mrs. Sterling informed me he would see me in his study after breakfast. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crossed the cavernous central hall and knocked on the heavy door of the West Wing study. "Enter," a low voice called out. The room was the heart of the house. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling on 3 walls, crammed with thousands of volumes. The fourth wall was a massive bay window that framed a panoramic, breathtaking view of the tempestuous Atlantic. And there, in the center of the window's curve, sat a man in a sophisticated, minimalist wheelchair. He had his back to me, his silhouette a dark shape against the bright, gray light. "Mr. Finch," I said softly. "I'm Dr. Monroe. Eliza." He didn't turn. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant cry of a gull and the rhythmic tapping of his fingers on the armrest of his chair. Then, slowly, he pivoted. I don't know what I had expected. Someone older, perhaps, or visibly frail. Alistair Finch was neither. He was likely in his late 30s, with a lean, strong frame that even a seated position couldn't fully disguise. He had unruly dark hair, a strong jawline shadowed with stubble, and the most intelligent, piercing blue eyes I had ever seen. But they were eyes shuttered with a deep, weary cynicism. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of indifference, yet beneath it, I sensed a simmering frustration that felt volcanic. He looked me over, his gaze sharp and analytical, as if he were deconstructing me piece by piece. "Dr. Monroe," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that held a note of biting amusement. "They sent a doctor this time. Are you here to cure me with your youthful optimism?" I felt my cheeks flush but held my ground. I'm here to provide medical support and assistance, as outlined in my contract. He gave a short, humorless laugh. The contract? Yes, the one that pays you an obscene amount of money to watch me slowly rust. Let me save you some time. I require medication for chronic nerve pain at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. I am capable of administering it myself. I follow a physical therapy regimen of my own design. I do not require companionship. You are free to enjoy the extensive library and the morbidly beautiful scenery. Just stay out of my way. He turned back to the window, a clear, unequivocal dismissal. I stood there for a moment, feeling like a fool. But then, a quiet spark of defiance, a feeling I hadn't felt since I'd walked out of that cafe, ignited within me. With all due respect, Mr. Finch, I said, my voice quiet but firm. My contract also makes me responsible for your medical oversight. That means I need to understand your condition, your medication, and your therapy regimen. I can't do that if I'm staying out of your way. I will be professional and unobtrusive, but I will do my job. He turned his head slightly, one eyebrow raised in what looked like grudging surprise. Unobtrusive. We'll see. The first weeks were a silent, tense dance. I kept my word. I was a quiet presence, a shadow in the enormous house. I learned his routine from a distance. He spent most of his days in the study, surrounded by books and journals, though I never saw him write. He ate his meals alone. In the afternoons, he would sometimes sit on the stone veranda, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the sea with an expression of such profound loss that it made my own heartache feel small. I used the time to create my own routine. I walked for hours along the cliff paths, letting the fierce, salty wind whip away the cobwebs in my mind. I read book after book from his magnificent library, losing myself in other worlds. I spoke to Beatrice on the phone every night, her voice a steady anchor in my sea of uncertainty. I was healing slowly, quietly, in the majestic solitude of Greywater House. I didn't try to force a connection with Alistair. I simply did my job with quiet competence. I would prepare his medication and leave it for him. I reviewed the physical therapy charts left by his previous therapist, making small, professional notes. One afternoon, I found a rare, leather-bound edition of Whitman's Leaves of Grass left open on a table. The next day, I left a small, first-edition copy of a lesser-known poet from the same era on the table beside it. I never mentioned it. He never mentioned it. But the next day, the Whitman was gone, and the new book was open. The first crack in his armor came a month into my stay. A storm had been raging for 2 days, trapping us inside as the wind howled like a tortured spirit and rain lashed against the windows. The power flickered and finally died, plunging the great house into an eerie, candlelit darkness. I found Alistair in the study, staring into the fire I had built, his face etched with a pain that seemed deeper than physical. "The anniversary," he said, without preamble, his voice rough. "Of the fall." I didn't offer platitudes or sympathetic noises. I simply pulled up a small ottoman and sat near the hearth, giving him the space to speak if he chose. I was a climber, he said, his eyes fixed on the flames. Not a professional, but it was my church. The focus, the silence, the world shrinking to just you and the rock face. I was in the Alps. A solo climb. A stupid mistake. A loose rock, a bad hold. They found me 2 days later. He fell silent, the weight of the unspoken hanging between us. I used to conquer mountains, his silence screamed. Now I can't even manage the stairs. It must be hard, I said softly, to have the landscape of your life so drastically altered. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, for the first time. The cynicism in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of raw vulnerability. "Landscape of my life," he repeated quietly. "You're a poet, Dr. Monroe." "No," I replied. "Just a careful observer." That night, something shifted. The silence between us became less tense, more companionable. He started joining me for dinner in the grand dining room, and we would eat, often without speaking, but the shared space felt like a bridge being built, plank by quiet plank. The real discovery, the one that changed everything, happened late one night about 2 months into my stay. I was awakened by a strange, rhythmic thudding sound coming from a part of the West Wing I'd never entered, a small, private gymnasium. Fearing he had fallen, I grabbed my medical kit and rushed down the silent, darkened halls. I pushed the gym door open a crack and peered inside. The sight that met my eyes stopped my breath. Alistair was out of his chair. He was standing, braced between two parallel bars, his body trembling with a violent, exhaustive effort. Sweat poured down his face, his knuckles were white where he gripped the bars, but he was doing it. He was taking a step. And another. Each movement was a study in pure, unadulterated willpower, a battle against his own broken body. He wasn't just doing physical therapy, he was fighting a war in secret. He was so consumed by his effort that he didn't hear the door creak. It was only when he faltered, his leg giving way, that he gasped and saw me standing in the doorway. His face, which had been a mask of fierce determination, twisted into one of pure fury. "Get out," he roared, his voice cracking with humiliation and rage. "Get out now." I didn't move. My medical training kicked in, but it was overlaid with a wave of something else, not pity, but a profound, gut-wrenching respect. He wasn't a man who had given up. He was a man who was terrified of failing in front of an audience. "Why are you hiding this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because the second people see a flicker of progress, they expect a miracle," he snarled, his chest heaving. "They start planning the victory parade. And when the miracle doesn't come, when you're still not the man you used to be, they get disappointed. Their hope becomes a weight I can't carry. I've watched it happen. I will not do it again." "So you'd rather they believe you've given up?" "It's easier than watching their faces fall," he bit out. His jaw was tight, his whole body shaking, not just from the effort, but from the force of his raw, exposed emotions. I stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind me. I walked toward him slowly, as one would approach a wounded, cornered animal. "Maybe you've just had the wrong audience," I said gently. "I'm not here for a miracle, Alistair. I'm a doctor. I know what healing looks like. It's not a parade. It's small, brutal, incremental work. It's what you're doing right now. You don't have to do it alone." He stared at me, his furious, uncertain gaze locked on mine. The rage in his eyes slowly subsided, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. He sagged against the bars, and I moved forward, helping him ease back into his wheelchair, my touch purely professional, supportive. He was silent for a long time, his breathing ragged. Finally, he looked up at me, the mask stripped away, leaving only a man who was tired of fighting alone. "Fine," he muttered. "But this stays between us. No one. Not Mrs. Sterling, not my publisher. No one." "I understand," I said. "And you follow my lead," he added, a hint of his old command returning. "We work on my terms." Agreed. A new partnership was forged that night, in the hushed, secret space of the gym. Our new routine began before sunrise, before the rest of the house stirred. It was grueling work. But I was there not as a cheerleader, but as a quiet, steady support. I was a spotter, a medical monitor, a silent witness to his private, courageous war. And as he slowly, painfully, began to reclaim his body, I realized I was also, slowly, painfully, reclaiming myself. The first sign of the coming storm was the arrival of Richard Thorne. He was Alistair's literary agent and, I gathered, his oldest friend. He blew into Greywater House on a gust of expensive cologne and false bonhomie, his personality a stark, jarring contrast to the quiet dignity of the house. He was handsome in a slick, practiced way, and he treated Alistair with a condescending familiarity that set my teeth on edge. "Alistair, my boy," he boomed, clapping Alistair on the shoulder. "Still brooding in your magnificent castle? You look pale. You need some sun. And a better brand of whiskey." He largely ignored me, dismissing me with a cursory glance as the new nurse. During his 2-day visit, he and Alistair were closeted in the study for hours. I caught snippets of their conversations, talk of foreign rights, film options, and a new legacy collection of Alistair's work. Richard was pushing Alistair to sign a thick sheaf of documents, claiming it was a deal that would secure his financial future forever. "It's a new holding company, Alistair," I overheard Richard saying, his voice smooth as silk. "It will manage your entire back catalog. We'll bring in a top-tier marketing team, Re-release the paperbacks, create a whole new brand around you. You won't have to lift a finger. Just sign, and let us take care of your legacy. Alistair, who was exhausted from our morning's physical therapy session, was resistant. I'll look it over, Richard. I'm not signing anything today. Don't be difficult, Richard cajoled. This is a golden opportunity. We have investors lined up. In fact, the primary backer is a new media division of the Sinclair Development Group. They're looking to branch out, and they see you as their cornerstone literary author. Sinclair. The name hit me like a physical blow. I froze in the hallway, the tea tray I was carrying suddenly feeling immensely heavy. It couldn't be a coincidence. My mind flashed back to Daniel, to his talk of synergy and ambitious connections with Victoria Sinclair. That night, after Richard had left, I found Alistair staring into the fire, the unsigned contract lying on the table beside him. I knew I was overstepping, risking the fragile trust we had built, but I couldn't stay silent. Alistair, I began, my voice trembling slightly. That name Richard mentioned. Sinclair. I know it. He looked up, his brow furrowed. What about it? I took a deep breath and told him everything. About Daniel, the broken engagement, the talk of empires and ambitious alignments with Victoria Sinclair. I explained how I had been so cleanly and efficiently discarded in favor of a connection to her family's power. I don't think they're just interested in your legacy, I finished, my voice low. I think they're trying to acquire it, to strip mine it, because they believe you're finished. And I think my ex-fiancé and your oldest friend are the tools they're using to do it. He was silent for a very long time, his expression unreadable. I thought I had gone too far, that he would tell me I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my own drama onto his life. Instead, he picked up the contract. My father was a corporate lawyer, he said quietly. He taught me to read the fine print. Especially when a friend tells you not to. For the next 2 days, we became a team of forensic investigators. We sat at the huge oak table in the study, and with a quiet, focused intensity, Alistair dissected the contract line by line. I researched the shell companies and holding corporations listed, tracing them back through a labyrinth of legal entities until we found it, a direct link to a media subsidiary wholly owned by Sinclair Development. The contract wasn't a partnership, it was a transfer of ownership. It would give them complete control over his life's work, his name, his future, for a fraction of its worth. Richard's commission was a staggering 7-figure sum. It was a betrayal of the deepest, most profound kind. The fire that had been slowly rekindling in Alistair's eyes now blazed. The melancholic author was gone, replaced by a quiet, formidable strategist. He thinks I'm a ghost, Alistair said, his voice laced with cold fury. He's about to find out he's wrong. The climax wasn't a dramatic boardroom showdown. It was something far quieter and more devastating. Alistair arranged a conference call. On the line were Richard, 2 lawyers from the Sinclair Group, and Alistair's own attorney, a shrewd, silver-haired woman from Portland whom we had briefed extensively. I sat beside Alistair at the study table, a silent partner in the war room. Richard began the call, his voice oozing confidence. Alistair, glad we can finally put this to bed. The Sinclair team is here, ready to welcome you to the family. Before we proceed, Alistair said, his voice calm and measured, I have a few questions about the structure of this holding company. And then, with the precision of a master storyteller, he began to unravel their entire scheme. He laid out the shell corporations, the transfer of intellectual property rights, the hidden clauses. He never raised his voice. He simply presented the facts, each one a nail in Richard's coffin. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the color draining from Richard's face. The Sinclair lawyers began to bluster, but Alistair's attorney cut them off, her voice like ice. My client has all the documentation he needs to pursue a case for fraudulent misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty, she stated coolly. However, he is prepared to forego legal action on the condition that this contract is voided, effective immediately, and that you, Mr. Thorne, resign as his agent and never contact him again. There was more sputtering, but the fight was over before it began. They were caught. The call ended. The connection was severed. The quiet of the study descended once more. Alistair leaned back in his chair, the tension finally draining from his shoulders. He looked at me, his blue eyes clear and bright. "Thank you, Eliza," he said, and the simple words held more weight than 1,000 flowery speeches. "You did it, Alistair," I whispered. "No," he said, a slow, real smile spreading across his face. "We did." In that moment, I realized the truth of Beatrice's words. I hadn't mended my old story. I had walked away from it entirely and, in this quiet, windswept corner of the world, had become the co-author of a brand new one. After the storm of the betrayal passed, a new kind of peace settled over Greywater House. It was no longer a place of silent, aching grief, but one of quiet, purposeful creation. The ghosts of the past had been exorcised, replaced by the steady rhythm of our work. We worked together every day. In the mornings, we focused on his physical recovery, the grueling sessions in the gym now filled not with secret shame, but with shared determination. He was walking now, with the aid of a single cane, his steps growing stronger and more confident each week. In the afternoons, we would sit in the study, and he would write. He dictated, and I typed, his words flowing with a clarity and power he hadn't possessed in years. He was writing a new novel, a story of a man piecing himself back together after a great fall. It was his story, but it was also, in some ways, ours. The house itself seemed to breathe again. We opened the windows to let in the sea air. I filled the rooms with fresh flowers from the local village market. Mrs. Potts, the cook, started humming in the kitchen. The melancholy had lifted, replaced by a gentle, hopeful light. My own healing was just as profound. The sharp edges of my heartbreak had softened, the memories of Daniel fading like a photograph left too long in the sun. I no longer saw his betrayal as a reflection of my own worthlessness, but as a catalyst that had pushed me onto a path I never would have found on my own. I had come to Maine to run away, but I had ended up running directly into myself. I had learned to set boundaries, to trust my own instincts, to find stability not in another person, but within the quiet strength of my own heart. One cool autumn evening, as the sun set over the ocean in a blaze of orange and purple, we were sitting on the veranda, wrapped in thick wool blankets. The manuscript of his new book, now complete, lay on the table between us. He was quiet for a long time, watching the waves. Then he turned to me. "I'm dedicating it to you," he said softly. I looked at him, my heart swelling. "Alistair, you don't have to do that." "I know," he said. He reached over and took my hand, his grip warm and steady. When I was at my lowest, I believed my story was over. I thought the best I could hope for was for someone to manage the legacy of what I was. "You didn't see a legacy. You saw a person. You didn't try to fix me. You just sat with me in the dark until I was ready to find the light myself. You didn't just help me write a book, Eliza. You helped me write my way back to life." He didn't pull out a ring. He didn't make a grand declaration. It was something quieter, deeper. It was an acknowledgement of a partnership built not on romance, but on a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and shared vulnerability. It was the offering of a future, a story we would continue to write together. I thought of the woman who had arrived at Greywater House 6 months earlier, shattered and lost. I thought of the walls I had built around my heart. And I looked at this brilliant, resilient man beside me, a man who had shown me that true strength isn't about never falling, but about having the courage to get back up, even if you need a helping hand. I leaned my head on his shoulder, the scent of the sea and old books filling my senses. I didn't know what the next chapter held for us. There were no guarantees, no certainties. But for the first time in my life, that didn't scare me. I was home. Not in a house, no matter how magnificent, but in the quiet, steady truth that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I intertwined my fingers with his, and together, we watched the last light of day fade into the endless, hopeful horizon.